Welcome. Okay. We're delighted to have you join us for today's global conversation. The theme for today's conversation is Latin America and the Caribbean, and we will have an opportunity to hear from people contributing to this goal from a diversity of perspectives and contexts. We'd like to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors for this session: UW's Institute for Regional and International Studies National Resource Center, Latin American, Caribbean, and Iberian Studies, or LASIS, CALS Study Abroad, and to our speakers for sharing their work with us. The flow for today's conversation is as follows. We will begin with a brief introduction to the region and to LASIS. Following, we will hear from an international partner, a student, and a faculty member sharing their work with us. I will introduce each speaker prior to their presentation. They'll each have roughly 10 minutes, including time for question and answer. Following the presentations, we will shift to sharing some ways to get involved in Latin America and the Caribbean. We will begin by featuring a study abroad program for students and then move on to sharing some additional ways to get involved. I am your moderator for today's conversation. For those who do not know me, my name is Jennifer Kushner, and I'm the Interim Director of CALS Global in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at UW-Madison. I'm a social scientist by training, and my main areas of expertise are in systems thinking, systems strategy and evaluation, and water. I've worked in Latin America and the Caribbean for the past 20 plus years and actually happen to be in the region right now. We'd appreciate if you could mute your mics until after each presenter is finished speaking. Please feel free to put questions in the chat at any time, and speakers will be able to engage the questions following their presentation if time permits. Please note the session is being recorded. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, who will share a bit about the region. Dr. Alberto Vargas is the Associate Director of the Latin American, Caribbean, and Iberian Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and Faculty Associate at the Gaylord Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. Alberto studied agronomy at the Monterrey Technological Institute in Querétaro, Mexico, and earned a PhD in land resources and forestry from UW-Madison. He was one of the founders of an eco-development research center in Quintana Roo, Mexico in the 1980s, and has worked in global environmental policy in Washington, DC, and as a policy analyst for the Wisconsin Coastal Management Program. He currently teaches a seminar on sustainable development at UW-Madison and is interested in the interface between science and policy as it relates to conservation and development in Latin America and in other parts of the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jennifer. And I'm very glad that CALS is offering these global conversations. It's a really, really great initiative, and it's a pleasure to share these brief moments with you. LASIS, the Latin American, Caribbean, and Iberian Studies Program, is one of the 9 area studies programs in campus. So we're in the international division. The Latin American Studies at Madison is one of the oldest in the nation, one of the oldest in the US. And some people find it strange that universities are way up north in the Midwest has a strong Latin American studies programs, and our history explains that. We can trace the origins of our program to the 1930s, when scholars from Spain came to Madison to study medieval literature and Hispanic studies, teaching Spanish, and then Portuguese, sort of covering the Iberian Peninsula. And that evolved gradually to the creation of the Spanish and Portuguese department. And in the 1960s, when the area studies were sort of founded in the US, UW-Madison was in a perfect position to take advantage of this interest and launch a successful program that it still is today. So the name evolved from Ibero-American studies, then to Latin American and Iberian studies. And then in the 2000s, with one of our directors who studied the Caribbean, inserted the Caribbean part. So right now we're the Latin American, Caribbean, and Iberian Studies program. So we offer bachelor's in Latin American studies and master's, dual degree with law, and a minor in a PhD. We're a very small office, and we work with affiliate faculty across campus, about probably 90 faculty, including several in CALS. And that's why I'm very, very glad that these conversations are going on, sort of to strengthen the relation between area studies and CALS. I'm an alum of one of the CALS programs, and I always found CALS as a home. I had my office in Russell Labs, and I have a great colleagues there. So it's a pleasure to do that. So in ways that you could engage with LASIs, we offer weekly lecture on Tuesdays at noon, and you can request to be put on our mailing list, going to our website, lasis.wisc.edu, and ask to be put in our mailing list. And each week you'll receive an announcement of several events that are going on. And as I said, these lectures on Tuesdays are free and are a diverse program. This semester, I can think one of our CALS affiliates is going to present. Professor Michel Wathieu is going to present. Also have a student from botany, Tabitha Faber, who is going to present issues that might be of interest to of the audience in CALS. We also sponsor film series, and this in February. So this month we're having our partnership with the Cinematheque. We're showing some films from Spain. So those are on Fridays evenings, and you can check the program also in the Cinematheque website or in our website as well. So with that, I'll just stop, and be happy to answer any questions that you might have later. I also forgot to mention that we offer foreign languages, including Portuguese, Yucatec Maya, and Quechua, and occasionally other less commonly taught languages that some of our students take advantage of, including one of the speakers that you'll hear from. So with that, I'll just pass it back to Jennifer, and thank you so much for the invitation and welcome. And I hope you get engaged with us, with LASIs, for our programming. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alberto. And we will have additional information about ways to connect further on in the session today. I'm now pleased and honored to introduce a long-standing and important partner for CALS, Dr. Carlos Gomez, with whom we currently have several collaborations underway. Dr. Gomez is a professor in ruminant nutrition at Universidad Nacional Agraria La Molina in Lima, Peru. He got his PhD in animal nutrition at University of Guelph in Canada. He has led research projects related to livestock production and its relationship with climate change in collaboration with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the International Potato Center, the International Livestock Research Institute, and the World Bank, among others. Without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Carlos.
Good afternoon from Peru. As I was presented, my name is Carlos Gomez. I am professor in the Animal Science Department at Universidad Agraria La Molina in Peru. I lead a livestock and climate change research center. And as part of those research activities, I will share with you what our linkages are with University of Wisconsin at present. What's the objective of the center? To identify and assess a strategy for mitigation and adaptation of livestock to the effects of climate change. We have different sites in Peru where we do our work, our research work. One of those places that I'm going to introduce to you is in the Amazonian. Specifically, we are working in the northern Amazonian, as you can see in the map. It is at 230 meters above sea level. So it is like you see in the picture when you go down from the Andes to Amazonas River. That's the area that we are working. That is more occupied than the Amazonian itself. And that occupation is in agricultural and forestry use, but also it is with high risk of erosion because of land use. Temperatures are in the range of 26 Celsius and annual rainfall 1,200 millimeters. We began activities with UW through one of my students applying to get a Borlaug fellowship. And we were happy that Professor Picasso from agronomy hosts his fellowship of Dante in Madison. That was in 2018. We have had in the past other students and faculty members that have been involved in similar program. In this case, through Dante, we went to a second application that was related to the same area of the first one. That means silvopastoral systems in the tropics. In the case of our second engagement, that is a Borlaug follow-up. We are looking more specifically on quantifying ecosystem services. Again, Professor Picasso is involved in this follow-up Borlaug, and it is also Professor Watu from the Department of Animal Science. These two projects that just commented has facilitated us to apply to another funding. And I'm going to tell you that—
Carlos, I'm sorry to interrupt. We lost your sound.
Is it okay?
It's a little quiet.
Can you hear me?
Yes, okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to say that based on our prior projects, we applied to a larger one. This is from the National Academy of Sciences, and we are following up our exploration of ecosystem services in silvopastoral systems in the Amazonian. This call required that people from ARS, the National Institute for Research on Agriculture of the United States, participates. And that's happy for us because we are enlarging our auditorium to work with. This project has allowed our former master students to get into Madison to do his PhD. where our initial partners are now their advisors. And I'm happy also that I'm a member of the committee of his doctoral program. It's very important for us that the work that we do, like you in the States, gets into publication. And I can share with you 2 documents that are already at that stage that shows good partnership with the colleagues that we do the work. What do we see as a benefit through this interaction? I can say that it improves our teaching and our research. You can see here 2 pictures of our campus. Our campus is in Lima. We are 5,000 students, all concentrated in agriculture and natural resources. Our teaching, through the interaction with our colleagues, both students and teaching staff at UW Madison, improve our teaching because we get new experiences, new skills, and we exchange ideas with colleagues. Also, and it is very clear, it improves our research quality. To exchange again and co-planning, we improve our research. You can see here 2 institutes that we own, one in the highlands, 3,500 meters above sea level, and another in the Amazonian, close to the area where we are working now with the projects that I just commented. You can see our symbol. We are Universidad Nacional Agraria La Molina, and in Latin it means I want to crop men and land. So for us to exchange, to have people visiting us with our same general interests, and we being hosted abroad, give us this opportunity to fulfill our general university objective. I want to crop man, brain, and land. I want to say that our program is largely international. More or less 50% of our research projects have international component, both in the teaching and research topics. The University of Madison is one of the main partners in our efforts. We also work with institutes in Europe and also with international research centers, all with the objective to improve exchange, gain in the sharing of ideas. I want to give thanks to the opportunity to be part of this global conversation, exposing to you our ideas about the topic. Dante is now in the tropics doing his fieldwork, part of his fieldwork for his doctoral thesis. I have had the benefit to visit 5 times, I guess, Madison. I'm here with Professor Watu, with your very happy winter down there. Thank you very much. Any question, ready to entertain them.
Thank you so much, Carlos. We probably have time for one question for now, and I'm not seeing any in the chat. we'll move on and we will share the contact information for all of our presenters along with additional information from today if you want to follow up directly with questions or conversation. Thank you again, Carlos. Next up, we have Miss Anika Rice. Anika is a people environment geographer studying agroecology, gender, and migration in a changing climate. She received her BA in human geography from UC Berkeley in 2014, and then worked as a feminist outdoor educator and farm curriculum writer. She earned a master's degree last semester in geography here at UW, which she will share about today. Anika, I pass it to you.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. So lovely to be in this conversation with lots of diverse folks from all over. I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint. Okay. Great. So let me just minimize all your pop-ups and stuff. Okay. Like Jennifer said, my name is Anika Rice. I'm from the geography department, currently a PhD student, and today I'll be talking a bit about my work in Guatemala around agroecology, social networks, and economic solidarity during the pandemic. So a bit about my background, just I thought it might be helpful for, I know there are students on the call, like how did I end up doing this kind of work? Before coming to grad school, I had done outdoor and experiential education with a feminist outdoor ed nonprofit. I had also written and taught agroecology to all ages and done some farming and worked previously in Central America as well. So I was coming to grad school with these interests in agroecology and livelihoods, in solidarity work with farmers. And then in the geography department, I'm continuing it in my PhD using the lenses of political ecology, feminist geography, and connections between migration and climate change. So when the pandemic began in March 2020, I was talking with other researchers, working closely with Claudia Calderon, who's on this call, who's a professor in CALS, as well as my contacts in Guatemala in the region. And hearing that the March 2020 national curfew, the restrictions on movement in Guatemala had caused municipal shutdowns and completely or nearly completely closed physical marketplaces, I started to hear about the considerations for rural smallholders or campesinos. Campesinos means person of the campo or person of the field. And so the folks I was talking with were having issues with markets and supply chains, accessing inputs for their farms. The lack of transportation was making it really hard to get to and from markets where people would usually sell and purchase agricultural goods. And then big changes in off-farm employment and migration and remittances were also of note, although I won't really touch on those two right now today. So from these conversations, I collaboratively developed some research questions. The first one has to do with how agroecology affects smallholder resilience to the economic shock associated with the pandemic. And I don't really have time to get into all the theory and definitions behind these terms, but with agroecology, I'm referring to a spectrum of agroecological practice of the science, movement, and practice of sustainable agriculture and food system redesign. And with resilience, we're really referring to kind of how are farmers maintaining production, consumption, and access to sales, with keeping in mind how folks might be kind of bouncing forward or developing new alternatives instead of necessarily staying in the same within the same systems. And the second question has to do with this interest I have in solidarity movements. So I also asked, how do farmer organizations' efforts to promote agroecology open up space for long-term solidarity building? So I'll share here a map of the research sites. I collaborated with 8 organizations across 6 departments of Guatemala. And although I don't have time to get into the details of all of them because they're all quite unique, here are examples of a few of the collaborating organizations. So They vary in terms of membership size and when they were founded. They also implement agroecology differently. Some focus on plot level programming, and some also integrate agroecological supply chain development. And they also vary in terms of Indigenous membership, and some are explicitly working within an Indigenous rights framework, while others may not. But all the organizations are committed to food sovereignty and community development through agroecology, and they were chosen because they represent and engage with different facets of agroecology movements in Guatemala. So in terms of my methods, like I said, this was done during the pandemic. So although I had been to Guatemala right before the pandemic because I was setting up what was then a different research project with some of the same partners, I ended up doing this all remotely. So it was remote ethnography and surveying using mostly WhatsApp and Zoom. And almost all of the farmers who I corresponded with are connected on WhatsApp. So I did interviews with individual farmers and staff at the organizations. Some of those staff were my research assistants who helped do interviews in Mayan languages where folks didn't speak Spanish. So it's this photo that you see here on the left. There's a woman interviewing a farmer in Canjobal Maya in Huehuetenango. And then I did surveys with the 8 organizations. Triangulation of the data with these organizational contexts with the participants was an important part of my approach. And this led to both qualitative and quantitative analysis. While I don't in this unfortunately short presentation or sharing have time to talk about my results in full, I'll just briefly touch on some of the summaries. With regards to the first research question about agroecology and resilience, agroecological practices and including prior engagement with these organizations were connected to farmers' ability to maintain or increase their production during the pandemic, and also to maintain food access for their families during the pandemic. So this pointed to a positive relationship between agroecology and resilience at the plot level. And it's been well documented in other literature that these practices you see here help farmers face previous environmental and socioeconomic shocks. And so the data that I collected showed that this held true during the pandemic, that folks who had diversified stable subsistence crops and were growing vegetables in home gardens, for example, and then also engaging in seed saving practices and working with medicinal plants, and often indigenous or traditional traditions of medicinal plants, had more resources available to them and were able to continue both producing and maintaining access to food for their families. On the whole, although I also highlight that resilience that was reached through a lot of hard work and struggle as well, and it wasn't necessary. It's not necessarily an easy process or a given for farmers in these situations who do have a lot of constraints in terms of land and access to water, and access to training and capital, et cetera. I'll also touch on some of the data collected about my second research question about social networks and collective action. So this pointed to social networks and collective actions that were based around and through these farmer organizations, helped mediate alternative forms of market exchange during the pandemic. So how did they do this? These are just a few of the solidarity-based actions that I'll highlight. Novel home markets were a kind of top strategy for a lot of people, basically farmers who usually would have gone to a municipal market to sell the agricultural goods that they were producing or offering, and then also buy other agricultural goods, ended up hosting and receiving buyers at their homes, on their porch, in their yards, or maybe at the field site itself. And this was all done really through the existing social networks and through existing and through ties with the farmer organizations. So it was people calling people up and saying, oh, I know that you're a reliable agroecological producer who produces really healthy food, and this is what I need right now. And folks would come to their homes. So it sounds really simple, but it's a simple social tool and social technology that I think we saw in other parts of the world. If you think of of a lot of the mutual aid and kind of seed sharing that happened here in the United States as well. It's a little bit similar, although in a very different context. And then bartering and gifting practices also resurged during the pandemic, and people talked about this as a resurgence of indigenous or traditional practice. And these first 2 points are notably helped farmers move between formal and informal markets with more agility. So having that kind of flexibility when markets were closed and not available to them was really important. Another couple things that people and then the organizations as a whole did were having women's cooperative initiatives, which also often included youth participation. So this was women who were already set up and well-resourced, who had like heirloom chicken projects or medicinal herb gardens and tea processing facilities that were able to pivot and scale up based on local demand. And then virtual markets and online sale capacity were really important for folks who needed to sell online, and one organization in particular did that. So that's just a little bit of a taste of some of the data from my research from my master's thesis. I'm going to end here. There's obviously a lot more to say and a lot more context to share, but when talking about this, I like to thank my funders, including Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems and CALS, and then all of the research collaborators both in Guatemala and other people I collaborated with. So I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anika. That was really inspiring, particularly, we've all been dealing with adaptations within COVID, but just really inspiring to see the results of your work. So hopefully an inspiration to other students as well. Moving on, our next distinguished speaker is Dr. Chris Hittinger. Chris received his PhD from UW-Madison and previously worked as a postdoc at the Washington University in St. Louis and the University of Colorado School of Medicine. His research lab studies the evolution of the gene networks that regulate yeast carbon metabolism, yeast biodiversity, and applications in the brewing and biofuel industries. His work has taken him to many countries, including Argentina and Mexico. Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Sorry, I had to figure out how to unmute myself. Is the display showing up correctly?
Can you try to hit swap displays, please?
How about that?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks. Well, I'm excited to tell you a little bit about our work on the yeasts of Latin America with our collaborators. So first, I want to back up and remind people what yeasts are. These are little eukaryotic microorganisms that we may know from winemaking or bread making, other fermented foods and beverages, but they really view the world as a menu of things that they could eat that are made of carbon and store energy. These are, of course, a lot of them are sugars that are made by plants capturing energy from the sun, and they make different carbon products in the process of fueling their own metabolism. Maybe again, most notably for highly fermentative yeasts, ethanol and carbon dioxide. Budding yeasts are incredibly diverse. So if we look at their sequence diversity, the diversity of their DNA and their amino acids, the model yeast Saccharomyces cerevisiae here is being compared, for example, to animal and plant model systems. And we can see, if we look at the amount of diversity, it is similar in the entire group of budding yeast as it is to the entire animal kingdom or the entire plant. So here, green algae are as different from multicellular plants as one yeast can be from another yeast, as different as a roundworm can be from a human. So there's a whole lot of diversity there. One project that we've been working on in the lab for the last several years is to develop a genotype phenotype map across the 400 million years of evolution that budding yeast have evolved. And the workflow for this project is that yeast taxonomists from all over the world have deposited their strains into culture collections when they formally describe them as a novel species. And we have a collaborator at the USDA who, until he passed away recently, was sort of the granddaddy of budding yeast taxonomy and had collected all of these. They've come up to UW-Madison and they've had their genome sequenced, and we've generated high throughput growth curves, thousands and thousands and thousands of data points in terms of what they can eat and how well they can do it. So this is kind of the general workflow that a lot of the research in my lab starts with, is building out this data set. But instead of starting with things that are frozen away or dried away in culture collections, we can also deploy this pipeline with our collaborators. And so we've been working very closely for the last few years with Diego Libkind, who's at the Universidad Nacional del Camaju in Argentina, as well as Carlos Rosa at the Universidad Federal de Minas Gerais in Brazil. And so these two, in their own respective countries, are expert yeast hunters, and they go out and collect yeasts, in Diego's case, from the Patagonian Andes, and in Carlos's case, from the Brazilian rainforest. And so all we have to do is take their strains of interest and put them through this pipeline, and they've been generating lots of cool data for us. So just to show you, we have incorporating Diego and Carlos's strains, plus all previously described budding yeasts. We have a massive data set now, basically describing all known biodiversity of this important group of microorganisms. And we can see, if you know, that the yeast genus Saccharomyces is really just a pale blue dot of all of these diverse species. So I want to tell one little vignette about how our work has impacted a small corner of the economy of one South American country, and in this case, it's Argentina. And our research has some applied applications in biofuels and beverages. I'm going to tell you a beverage story, which focuses on these brown sugars here, maltose and maltotriose glucose, and then of course, ethanol and carbon dioxide. And the story has to do with brewing beer. So people have brewed beer for thousands of years with the model yeast Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's the same yeast that's also generally used to make wine and for bread to rise. And these are the types of beers that people have brewed with Saccharomyces cerevisiae. They're fermented at fairly warm temperatures. Now, many people may know that a lot of the big most productive macrobreweries, and indeed a lot of microbreweries, actually specialize in doing a cold fermentation process that was invented in the 15th century. These are lagers, and in fact, they constitute over 90% of the global beer market. And these are not brewed with Saccharomyces cerevisiae, because Saccharomyces cerevisiae does not grow well at the colder temperatures required to get the crisp, clear taste of a lager product. You have to brew it several tens of degrees colder, and then you also do a longer storage step, where the word lager actually derives its name from. And so people had known for a while that lager strains were different, and that they were hybrids of Saccharomyces cerevisiae and something else. But nobody had discovered that something else in nature until we teamed up with Diego Libkind. And about a decade ago, we discovered this species of yeast called Saccharomyces Ubanus, a wild, cold-tolerant species that came right out of the Patagonian Alps. These are galls on southern beech trees that actually have they extract a sugar from the southern beech trees, or nothophagus. And you can actually harvest them and chop them up, and they're kind of sweet on a salad, but they also have a sugar-rich substance in them. And apparently the Mapuche tribe in pre-Columbian times would actually even do a little extraction and make a fermented beverage out of this. So through genome sequencing, we showed that this new species was indeed the missing agent for hybridization. In the last 10 years in my lab, I'm not going to go through all the genetics, but I'll just tell you we've done a lot of functional dissection. So we now have a pretty clear idea of what the genetic basis is of the major traits that make a lager strain different from an ale strain. And again, that's all due to the discovery of the missing ancestor with our collaborator, Diego Libkind, and then also our ability to sequence genomes of industrial hybrids and also do genetic tests. We've also isolated Saccharomyces Ubanus, hundreds of strains Diego has from Patagonia. And people have also started isolating Saccharomyces Ubanus from other parts of the world using the isolation protocols Diego has developed. They're a lot rarer in other parts of the world. We've even isolated them from Wisconsin and North Carolina. And doing that, we're actually able to build a climatic model of where Saccharomyces Ubanus would be predicted to be based on where people have isolated. And it turns out that the dark green places are the places that are really hospitable, we think, for this yeast. Light green are somewhat hospitable. And this is basically exactly where people have isolated it, except you'll note Europe is predicted to be quite climatically hospitable, and still no one has isolated Saccharomyces Ubanus from Europe, which is a bit of a shock because that is where lager brewing, of course, began. In addition to explaining the genetic basis of industrial strains that people are using, there's also been a lot of interest in brewing with this new wild species. And so Heineken launched a limited release beers. This is with one of Diego's South American strains. This is with one of our North American strains from the Blue Ridge Mountains. This is from a Chinese colleague who isolated Saccharomyces Ubanus out here. And so this is kind of an interesting niche product. I'll also mention that when Diego first visited me when I was a postdoc in Colorado, this was, I guess now 13, 14 years ago, Diego had never really had any microbrewed beer. It was just not a thing in Argentina, in his part of Argentina. And so when he discovered Saccharomyces Ubanus, he was actually up against a challenge where there was this sort of unrivaled potential to get in on a lot of interest from a lot of companies, and there just wasn't a huge microbrewing culture in Bariloche, which is where Universidad Nacional del Camaju is. It is Bariloche is a tourist town. There's a ski industry. It's got a beautiful lake, glacial lake, not unlike Lake Mendota, except much bigger. And so it's a beautiful tourist town and a college town. And so there's a lot of potential there to get a microbrewery industry set up. And Diego spent really the last 10 years setting up QC training and training the local community on how to actually make good quality beers. And there are now more than a dozen microbreweries in Bariloche. And this is actually from an international conference that was held on yeasts, where we all got to try all of these breweries experimenting with Saccharomyces Ubanus, wild lagers that they had all made using this new species. And I think this is probably the only case in my, I guess, still relatively short career where I could actually see a pretty significant local economic impact, turning Bariloche into a bit of a mecca for the craft beer industry in South America. And I think it will continue to be an amazing tourist destination and full of tasty products for hopefully decades to come. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Jennifer.
Chris, thank you so much. That was really fascinating. I'd love to dig in more. Unfortunately, we need to keep going, but hopefully these conversations will continue offline here. Shifting gears, we want to focus on ways to get involved in study, research, outreach, or other activities within the region, Latin America and Caribbean. And so to kick us off, we're going to hear from the leader of one of CALS's study abroad programs. Dr. Sherry Tanumihardjo is a professor in the Department of Nutritional Sciences. She studies vitamin A and carotenoid metabolism and serves as the director of the undergraduate certificate in global health. She is the program leader of the CALS Study Abroad Summer Program, UW Linking Agriculture and Nutrition in Mexico. Sherry, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So today I will briefly talk about our Linking Agriculture to Nutrition class, which is held at the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center in Texcoco, Mexico. We have 4 instructors this particular year: Erica Ana, Veronica Lopez-Toros, who is from University of Sonora, and Kevin Pixley is our local host. In the Nutritional Sciences 203 class, we learn all about the Sustainable Development Goals. CIMMYT is part of the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, and they have embraced the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 15 centers across the world, and the one that we are going to is the one in CIMMYT, Mexico. So there's a global challenge, and CIMMYT has embraced this. And there's some tidbits I want to share with you. In the next 50 years, we will need to produce as much food as has been consumed over our entire human history. And then there are more people living inside this white circle than outside of it. Population growth is going to continue, and by 2015, we will require 60% more wheat and 90% more maize than we currently produce today. So why is maize and wheat important? 55% of people living in poverty depend on wheat. 50% of all maize production is located in developing countries. So what makes CIMMYT very unique? Well, CIMMYT holds one of the most comprehensive seed banks in the world for both maize and wheat. They have world-class scientists that they can train from all over the world. And also they impact local farmers. So while we are on the class in Texcoco, we actually visit the seed bank and we also visit farmers. So at CIMMYT, they have approximately 140 wheat accessions and 28,000 maize accessions. So we go down into the cold room, and this is the cold vault, and you'll see we're all kind of shivering here. And actually below this level, there is a -80 vault. So they really do try to save seed. This seed can be requested and sent to researchers all over the world. And then we look at these very nice fields that are right at the CIMMYT station where we stay. And this is a visiting scientist in this white hat, and she is giving us a lecture on what is happening at the CIMMYT research fields. So after we have seen the beautiful maize and wheat in the fields at the CIMMYT Research Center, we visit the farmers. And so this was not a particularly good year for Fernando and his friend, but we see this is a landrace maize. And one year, this particular farmer decided to grow a hybrid maize, which is usually a high producing variant, and he produced 14,000 tons. But his answer to that question was, where do I put all this maize? And he went back to growing his familial line of landrace maize, which you see in the field here. So we are learning directly from the farmers here. And then we will go visit tortillas, a tortilla making factories, everything from women doing it themselves to a more streamlined version. So CIMMYT has multiple wins on several of the Sustainable Development Goals, and this is from an agri-food system-based approach. Not only do they increase food yield, but they're also working on reducing energy and irrigation needs and trying to increase the profitability of local farmers. So what else do we do during the week when we are in class? We go to hike the Pyramid of the Sun. And so for those of you who haven't done this, it's a very nice hike up this particular pyramid. And you can see these happy badgers that made it to the top. I will say that this particular class is very interesting because it has involved generations. So you'll see a picture, the second man from the left, his name is Chris Hubble, and his sister, who was Liz Hubble, actually encouraged him to go on this class. And also the year that Sean Kepler brought his daughter Katie to the class, I also brought one of my sons to the class. And if that's not enough for generational input, Kayla, another Kepler, went a couple of years later as the TA for the course. So it's a very interesting, close-knit group of individuals. So after we've hiked the Pyramid of the Sun, we go to a local restaurant, which is actually set up in a cave. And this is at the end of a day where we have actually visited the farmers who provide the maize to this restaurant where they make all of their tortillas by hand. And so we are able to see the maize from the field to the plate and enjoy the maize while we eat our tortillas. Also during the week, we usually like to have a little bit of the local culture. And so we listen to a mariachi band. In other years, we have gone to the Folklorico Ballet, which is in Mexico City. So there are many happy smiles that come out of this class. This was a very large class. Sometimes we've had as few as 6 students, but then we've had as many as 25 coming from different universities. So it's a very nice class. I still am in touch with some of the students that have been on this class. This is a picture on the far right of Veronica Lopez. She is the local instructor. So why do we do this? Well, CIMMYT's mission is to sustainably increase maize and wheat production to reduce poverty and ensure global food security. And so it may come as a surprise to you that many of our students don't even know what a maize plant looks like. And so we are able to teach them about where our food comes from. We teach them about plant breeding. And this particular year, we will, with the help of Erica, Anna, will be doing more about food and culture. So I'm happy to entertain any questions if you want to put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Sherry. This looks fabulous. I'm ready to sign up. I think for the sake of time, what I'd like to do is, again, we'll make speaker information available to everybody who's registered for this, and if anybody who's got questions, please feel free to follow up directly with Sherry or the CALS Study Abroad office. So as we come to a close, we wanted to highlight a variety of other ways to get engaged in the region. I'm not going to talk through each link, but I am going to talk through a couple different kind of categories of engagement. And again, when this information gets sent out to you, you'll have some very specific links to check out depending on what your areas of interest are. So we'll just talk through several categories of opportunities. So grants. These are a great way to fund research or other international collaborations. Our office, CALS Global, has opportunities page off of our webpage where we post international grants. These particular ones have been called because they're related to Latin America, Caribbean, and Iberian studies. So I will just call out that first one on there, the Garden Grant, Global Agricultural Research and Development Network, is our own personal grant. It's a seed grant. The deadline is coming up in March. It's a grant that's intended to catalyze or seed new international collaborations. So please check that one out if you don't check any of the others out. Moving on, another category are volunteer opportunities and fellowships. Volunteer opportunities can be very short term, 1 or 2 weeks, to long term, couple of years. So in this particular list of things, the farmer to farmer volunteer opportunities tend to be, like I said, 1 or 2 weeks. A Peace Corps tends to be closer to 2 years, although there's some variation in both of those. With volunteer opportunities, usually your expenses are paid, your travel and living sorts of expenses. Sometimes there's some additional stipend that accompanies those, but it's a great way to start to build some international experience in a particular area of interest. Fellowships are another way to get involved. They can be short-term or long-term. Some of these have been mentioned through our speakers today. And each sort of fellowship, their student fellowships, their faculty, staff fellowships, et cetera. But please check out the different types of fellowships. Those tend to be more focused. There might be a mentoring component with some of those. All right, moving on. Next page, thank you. Study abroad. Well, Sherry just gave us a wonderful introduction to the study abroad program she's leading. There are other study abroad opportunities also in Latin America and the Caribbean. Again, we won't go through each one, but please do check out, we've got programs in Mexico, Costa Rica, Ecuador, etc. We also have courses within CALS for students or others perhaps that are focused specifically in Latin America. MOUs, Memorandum of Understanding. These are formal partnerships that have been established between UW-CALS and another international partnering organization. The reason we bring these to your attention is because there are established relationships, and while there may be specific projects or activities that are going on right now related to these institutions, it might help if you're looking at doing some study or work in a particular place to learn that we've already got relationships with some organizations and institutions. If you want to learn more about those, please feel free to reach out to us in CALS Global. And then we also have faculty and staff that are affiliated with LESIS, and those links and likewise with CALS Global and the CALS International Committee. The faculty and staff that are active and working in all across the region, who I'm sure would be happy to engage questions and talk about their work. Next slide. We have some events coming up. The dates are there. A variety of different kinds of kind of across the arts and sciences, health, interdisciplinary sorts of events, but great way to learn more, expand your understanding of the region and cultural aspects and areas of interest within the region. And then there's some additional places to learn more. There's some newsletters, our CALS Global newsletter, LESIS has a newsletter that Dr. Vargas had mentioned earlier. The Scholar Rescue Fund is an interesting opportunity, so we'd encourage you to look at that. So thank you. We hope you've been inspired. Like I said, we'll share this information with everybody who's registered for today's session. There was a lot there. Sorry, we didn't have time to really get into the conversation part of the conversations, but we do hope that you'll follow up with anything that's of interest. Please do join us next month for a conversation that's focused on South Asia. It's March 9th, 2 p.m., 2 to 3 p.m. Please check our website. We'll be also sending out information about that conversation with a new regional focus, new presenters and such. So thank you, everybody. It's been a wonderful time together, and we look forward to seeing you next month in South Asia.